You can't plan that. You hope it happens between actors, but it doesn't always.
Tony Randall was famous for being polite, professional, and completely focused on his acting work. He was the kind of person who avoided drama and controversy. People knew him for his perfect timing in comedy, his elegant style, and his sophisticated way of speaking. Whether he was performing in a play or appearing on a talk show, Randall had an old-fashioned charm that made him seem more like a smart New York gentleman than just another TV comedian. From the 1950s until the early 2000s, Tony Randall was everywhere in American entertainment. He became famous through many TV shows, movies, and game show appearances. But it was The Odd Couple that made him truly legendary. He played Felix Unger, a neat freak who was always worrying about cleanliness and order. His character was the complete opposite of Jack Klugman's messy Oscar Madison. Randall didn't just act like Felix, he seemed to become him. Fans couldn't tell where the character ended and the real person began. Despite being famous, Randall kept his private life very private. He stayed away from gossip magazines and treated everyone he worked with respectfully. He never had public fights or scandals. If something bothered him, he dealt with it quietly behind closed doors. This made him seem almost perfect to the public. But this perfect image made it very strange when fans noticed that one person had completely disappeared from Randall's life after The Odd Couple ended. Brett Somers, a funny actress who often appeared on the show and was known for her quick wit on game shows like Match Game, seemed to be completely erased from Randall's world. There were no reunions, no interviews together, not even a mention of her name. For someone like Randall, who had worked closely with her for years, to completely cut ties without any explanation was very unusual and concerning. At first, people thought they had just naturally grown apart, which happens a lot in Hollywood. But as years went by, and Randall continued to stay completely silent about her, the mystery became deeper. People who knew him started hinting that this wasn't just about growing apart. Something had happened that was serious enough to make Randall erase someone from his life completely. Since he rarely got upset about anything, whatever happened must have been very personal and hurtful. What made this even more surprising was who Brett Somers was in Randall's world. She wasn't just a random co-star. She was married to Jack Klugman, Randall's TV partner. She had been part of their close circle, someone viewers saw laughing and joking with Randall on set and on TV panel shows. She was practically part of the Odd Couple family, so for Randall to shut her out without a word was the first crack in his perfect image, a quiet but clear sign that something had gone very wrong behind the scenes. When The Odd Couple started on TV in 1970, Tony Randall and Jack Klugman were already experienced actors, but this show made them one of the most famous comedy pairs in TV history. Randall played the nervous, extremely clean Felix Unger, while Klugman played the sloppy, straightforward Oscar Madison. Their opposite personalities created perfect comedy that audiences loved. Their friendship seemed so real on screen that fans believed they were best friends in real life too. The show was based on a play by Neil Simon, but Randall and Klugman brought something special to their characters that made them feel fresh and new. Every week, they turned simple arguments about cleaning or poker games into television gold. Behind the scenes, the two actors developed a close working relationship built on respect for each other. But there was a third person on set who played a bigger role than fans realized: Brett Somers. Brett Somers was more than just someone who occasionally appeared on The Odd Couple. She was Jack Klugman's real-life wife and a well-known TV personality. Her character, Blanche Madison, Oscar's ex-wife, appeared in several episodes and often added tension and comedy to the show. But her involvement went beyond just acting. Somers was also famous for appearing on game shows like Match Game, where she was known for her sharp wit and bold comments. She was the kind of person who could take over a room with just one joke. Randall and Somers worked together frequently. They not only shared scenes on The Odd Couple, but they also appeared together on panel shows, talk shows, and charity events. In public, they seemed like a friendly pair who enjoyed teasing each other. Randall would play the serious, proper character, while Somers would be the wild card who said unexpected things. Their playful arguments delighted audiences. She would tease him about being too uptight, and he would respond with dry humor. It seemed like harmless fun until it wasn't. While cameras captured their playful fighting, people who worked with them began to notice changes. Off-camera, the warmth between Randall and Summers started to disappear. Crew members remembered that Randall, who was usually generous and kind to his co-stars, would become distant when Summers was around. At first, it was subtle. He would skip dinners after filming, have shorter conversations, and avoid eye contact during rehearsals. But over time, it became obvious that their relationship was becoming strained, though no one knew exactly why. What made things more complicated was Summers' unique position. Because she was married to Klugman, she wasn't just an actress on set. She was also the wife of Randall's closest co-star. This meant she was allowed into private conversations and behind-the-scenes moments that few others could access. When someone that close to you starts acting cold, it doesn't just feel like distance, it feels like betrayal. The tension didn't key headlines at the time. Back then, Hollywood had an unspoken rule that problems should be handled quietly, and stars were expected to keep their complaints out of the newspapers. Randall, always the gentleman, never said anything publicly. Summers, on the other hand, had a different style. Her humor could be harsh, and although most of her comments were dismissed as jokes, some people began to wonder if her public teasing was hiding something deeper, something that Randall could no longer laugh off. What looked like a comedy partnership to viewers may have been quietly falling apart behind the scenes. While fans kept watching for more Felix and Oscar comedy, something much more personal was building up just beneath the surface. It all led up to one moment that would push Tony Randall to his breaking point and end a friendship that he had never even publicly acknowledged in the first place. In the world of 1970s television, roasts were a cruel kind of comedy sport. The Friars Club roasts were especially famous for going too far, because there were no limits. Nothing was off-limits. No insult too personal, no story too private. For most comedians, this was all part of the game. But for Tony Randall, that game ended the night Brett Summers took the microphone. The roast in question has become something of a legend, hard to find in full, whispered about in memoirs and backstage areas, but never aired completely. It was supposed to be a light-hearted tribute to the odd couple era, filled with inside jokes and friendly teasing. Randall, ever the professional, was there. He had probably prepared himself for a few jokes about his prim and proper TV personality. What he didn't expect was betrayal disguised as humor. When Brett Summers stepped up to speak, the mood in the room changed. She was known for her razor-sharp wit and her smoky voice, and the crowd was ready for fireworks. But what followed was more than comedy. It was exposure. Summers began telling stories from the Odd Couple set, but these weren't harmless behind-the-scenes tales. According to people who were in the room, she talked about Randall's insecurities as an actor, mocking his obsessive rehearsing, his need for control, and his tendency to redo scenes long after everyone else was satisfied. She painted him as neurotic not just on screen, but in real life, obsessed with how people saw him, constantly doubting himself, even breaking down privately when scenes didn't work perfectly. For someone as private and image-conscious as Randall, hearing those stories in public must have felt like having a curtain ripped away in the middle of a performance. The room laughed, but Randall didn't. Even worse, Summers allegedly made casual comments that cut deeper than professional teasing. She joked about Randall's personal life, something he fiercely protected. Whether it was intentional or not, her roast had stepped far beyond industry banter and into deeply personal territory. Friends sitting near Randall said his face went blank. Others claimed he walked out before the roast ended. The man who had built a career on staying calm looked shocked and hurt. People who knew Randall best said the roast changed everything. He wasn't one to lash out or create scenes, but he did believe in boundaries, and for him, Summers had crossed one too many. That night became the turning point, the moment he made a silent, permanent decision. He wouldn't confront her. He wouldn't respond publicly. But he would never speak to her again. It wasn't just about the roast. That was simply the final blow in a series of frustrations Randall had quietly put up with for years. Her on-air jokes, her unpredictable behavior, and her growing habit of turning private moments into public entertainment. It all added up. But the roast turned private humiliation into public spectacle, and that was something Randall couldn't forgive. Industry insiders who had been at the event were Most assumed Randall would brush it off and laugh along as so many had before him. but they underestimated just how much he valued his privacy. To him, acting was sacred, his image carefully managed, his dignity non-negotiable. And in one night, with a few jokes, Brett Somers had shattered all of that in front of their colleagues. After the roast, Randall pulled away from any projects or appearances involving Somers. He declined invitations, ignored requests, and skipped events. There was no statement, no explanation, just a growing wall of silence. And while Somers continued to joke about her time on The Odd Couple, Randall never mentioned her again. To the public, it seemed like nothing had happened. But to those who had been in that room, the message was clear. She had gone too far, and as the years went on, that silence became louder than any headline. After the roast, Tony Randall did what he always did. He kept it quiet. But behind the scenes, everything changed. Brett Somers, once a regular figure in his professional circle, completely disappeared from his world. There were no more joint appearances, no backstage photos, and no collaborative projects. The man known for his composure simply shut the door and never opened it again. To most people, Randall's silence looked like nothing at all. He never addressed what happened and never hinted at any grudge. But to those close to him, the change was impossible to ignore. Industry insiders noticed how he began turning down interviews if Somers was involved, avoiding events she might attend, and even declining tributes that mentioned her name. He didn't rage or make a scene, he just disappeared from her world. Randall's approach was strategic. By refusing to acknowledge the incident, he denied it further power. But make no mistake, it wasn't forgiveness, it was control. He chose silence as a form of retaliation, removing Somers from his professional story altogether. For someone as calculated and image-conscious as Randall, that kind of erasure spoke volumes. Brett Somers, for her part, never apologized publicly. In fact, she continued joking about the roast and her time on The Odd Couple as if nothing had happened. But Randall never joined in. Even during interviews where their shared history came up, he avoided any mention of her. It was as if she had been edited out of the story entirely, and that made fans curious. Why had these two performers who shared such electric chemistry on screen never reunited? Why were there no nostalgic interviews, no mutual tributes, no photo opportunities decades later? The silence grew louder with time, becoming a mystery fans couldn't explain until now. Because Randall's silence wasn't absence, it was intentional, and it sent a clear message to anyone paying close enough attention. While Tony Randall remained silent publicly, those in his inner circle began to speak more freely over the years. Quiet conversations with friends, off-the-record remarks to journalists, and stories from former colleagues all began to piece together a different story, one that confirmed the grudge was real and deeply personal. According to people who worked closely with Randall, the roast wasn't an isolated incident. It was the final spark in a long, simmering tension that had been building for years. Brett Somers, known for her sharp wit and unfiltered humor, had a habit of crossing lines. What she saw as jokes, Randall often saw as attacks, remarks that chipped away at his privacy, professionalism, and dignity. One longtime friend recalled Randall saying that Somers made the personal feel like performance. She had a way of turning private quirks into punchlines, and even when the cameras were off, the jokes didn't stop. He reportedly felt like she used their shared moments for material without ever considering how deeply those words could hurt. For a man like Randall, who prided himself on controlling his image and carefully managing how much of himself he gave to the public, that kind of exposure felt like betrayal. Another colleague described how Randall became guarded whenever Somers was in the room. He would speak less, retreat more, and make polite exits as soon as filming wrapped. It wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable. He was pulling away. According to them, his trust in her had been worn down piece by piece until there was nothing left to save. Some people thought the tension was rooted not just in personality clashes, but in competing values. Randall was meticulous, disciplined, and deeply serious about the craft of acting. Somers, on the other hand, thrived in the chaos of live television and unscripted comedy. She loved to shock and provoke. That contrast made their on-screen interactions dynamic, but off-screen it created friction that never fully resolved. Others pointed out the awkward triangle at play. As Jack Klugman's wife, Summers was deeply embedded in Randall's world. He couldn't simply walk away without also distancing himself from Klugman, his longtime friend and collaborator. That may be why Randall tolerated so much for so long, until the roast gave him the excuse he needed to cut ties for good. Interestingly, Klugman never publicly commented on the rift. Whether out of loyalty to both parties or discomfort with the situation, he stayed neutral. But even that silence added to the mystery. It suggested that whatever had happened was serious enough to remain unresolved, even among friends. Over time, as retrospectives and documentaries looked back on the odd couple, more people began to notice the absence. Why was Brett Summers not included in reunions? Why did Randall, always so gracious with former co-stars, avoid even mentioning her? It was a deliberate omission, one that fans couldn't explain until those close to him began confirming what had long been suspected. Randall never lashed out, never held a press conference, never aired grievances. But those who knew him understood that his silence was the message. The more Summers joked about their past, the more he buried it. And with each passing year, the distance between them grew until it was no longer just emotional. It was historical. Their story became a cautionary tale in the entertainment world, a reminder that not every feud explodes in public. Some unfold slowly, quietly, with no dramatic blowout. Just a deep, private decision never to let someone back in. And once Randall made that decision, he never looked back. When Tony Randall passed away in 2004, tributes poured in from across the entertainment world. Co-stars, directors, and friends celebrated his brilliance, his elegance, and his deep love for theater. But one name was conspicuously quiet in the coverage: Brett Summers. She offered a brief, respectful comment through a representative, calling Randall a one-of-a-kind performer, but it was vague, lacking the warmth and detail that usually come from a shared history. And just like that, their complicated connection was quietly buried, just as Randall had intended. Over the years, fans remained puzzled. Why had two performers with such rich chemistry and shared success simply gone separate ways without explanation? In an era of endless reunion specials and nostalgia-driven interviews, Randall and Summers never stood side by side again, and the silence became its own kind of statement. It was only after Summers passed away in 2007 that pieces of the puzzle began to surface. Crew members, former panel show regulars, and friends who had held their tongues began to speak more freely. Old interviews were re-examined and offhand comments reinterpreted. What had once seemed like a casual professional drift now looked more like a deliberate removal, and in hindsight, it all finally made sense. The heart of it wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a headline-grabbing scandal. It was more human and more relatable. Rand all felt betrayed. He felt exposed by someone he once worked closely with, someone who knew exactly where the line was and crossed it anyway. And instead of fighting back, he did what many people wish they had the strength to do. He walked away and never looked back. There's a strange kind of power in that. In a world that thrives on drama and public fallout, Tony Randall's quiet refusal to give the story oxygen made it even more haunting. His silence created a gap in the narrative, a blank space where a friendship should have been. And that space made people ask questions for decades. Today, the legacy of The Odd Couple still shines. The show remains a classic, with Randall and Klugman's performances endlessly rewatched by generations who never saw it live. But buried beneath the laugh tracks and perfectly timed punchlines is a real-life story of boundaries, betrayal, and silence. It's a reminder that even the most polished personas have limits, and even the most controlled lives can be shaken by one unexpected blow. In the end, Randall never spoke about Brett Summers again. Not in interviews, not in memoirs, not even in passing. She became a ghost in his story, present in the footage, erased from the memories. And in doing so, he sent a message louder than any argument could have. Some betrayals don't need an audience. They just need to be remembered and left behind. Because for Tony Randall, dignity always came first, even when it cost him a friendship, even when it meant rewriting history.